Another wage won't come, so we can come together and chant and have association. One of the things that Lord Chaitanya especially taught is that the most important thing for us to make spiritual advancement is associate with spiritually minded people. We all experience it. Sometimes, like summer is coming. I shouldn't say we all experience it. I experience sometimes. I'll pull up to a stop sign in the summer when everybody has their windows down, and if the two next doors like boom, 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 my whole body and mind starts going boom, 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 doesn't it? And if something a little, according to my taste, a little more uplifting comes up, I'm affected by that as well. So what to speak of the people that we associate with in our lives? We're very fortunate to have the opportunity to come to the temples that Prabhupada has created and to associate with devotees. So I was going to read one verse tonight, talk a little bit about Lord Chaitanya. And this is a very, very famous verse. For the sake of time, I'll just read the English and the translation and Prabhupada's purport. This is the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila 7:23. Anybody remember that verse, 7:23? Okay, pay attention, it's important. In distributing love of Godhead, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates did not consider who was a fit candidate and who was not, nor where such distribution should or should not take place. They made no conditions. Whenever they got the opportunity, the members of the Panchatattva distributed love of Godhead. Are we part of the purport by Srila Prabhupada? There are some rascals who dare to speak against the mission of Lord Chaitanya by criticizing the Krishna consciousness movement for accepting Europeans and Americans as Brahmanas and offering them sannyas. And here's an authoritative statement that in distributing love of Godhead, one should not consider whether the recipients are Europeans, Americans, Hindus, Muslims, etc. The Krishna consciousness movement should be spread wherever possible, and one should accept those who thus become Vaishnavas. Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we're going to come back to that text in a few minutes. So today is a very important day for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. We're known as Gaudiya Vaishnavas because these are the Vaishnavas that particularly worship and adhere to the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. That's our special emphasis. We understand that when Krishna comes as Lord Chaitanya, he's actually the most merciful incarnation. We understand that God is merciful, different understandings of that in different religious traditions. But we understand that Lord Chaitanya is the kindest, the most gentle, the most merciful of all the incarnations of the Lord. So keeping that in mind, I wanted to pause a little bit before we talk a little bit more about our philosophy, because we're sitting here tonight in a very warm building, surrounded by friends on a soft cloth, preparing in a short bit of time to have a nice feast when the auspicious time comes. But we know that in other parts of the world right now, people's lives are very distraught. Just ordinary citizens in the Ukraine, particularly, other places too, but also many Vaishnavas, particularly those of you that have followed on ISKCON News in particular. You get up-to-date reports there about what's happening with the devotees in those parts of the world. There's about 4,000 or 5,000 initiated, means fully committed followers of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, members of ISKCON in the Ukraine. There's about 20,000 devotees total. That's the estimate. I've been given by devotees there. And of course, there's many devotees in Russia. Prabhupada personally went to Russia, started the movement with one young Russian devotee, became his disciple. I don't know the numbers there, but I think there's approximately 100,000 people. Don't quote me on that, that's an estimate. The Ukrainian numbers are, I just got speaking to some Ukrainian devotees. There's a lot of devotees in Russia as well. And we know that the terrible situation where those two peoples are in conflict. And thousands of Krishna devotees, ISKCON devotees, are now refugees. We don't have an exact count because it's such a difficult situation. Ultimately, there's, what do they say now, 2.6 million refugees, the most recent number I heard. So we're also affected by that. Some of our temples are partially closed. Some of our temples, the deities have been taken off the altar and put to sleep. Special mantras to ask the Lord to sleep during these difficult times. we know there's parallels. If you go to Vrindavan, big controversies about which are the original deities, which ones went to Jaipur, when there were similar periods of violence that were there to protect the deities. And some devotees have actually gone. Some ISKCON people have gone from the UK and other places into the Ukraine. Everybody's, so many people getting out. Some ISKCON people have gone in specifically so that they can help. We know our God brothers and God sisters, fellow Vaishnavas in Hungary, reacted very quickly when the crisis first began, and they were doing prasadam distribution to thousands of people at several locations, in trade stations and then at the border, early on, before people really knew too much what was happening. And that's continued, and now devotees are taking refugees in Romania, in Poland, in Hungary, I believe in Spain and Italy, in other countries as well, working to get devotees to come into the Ukraine. So it's a big crisis for everyone, and we shouldn't think that our community is not affected by it. They are. So I'd just like to take a minute and ask all of us collectively to chant the Maha Mantra 3 times in a mood of prayer, asking Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna to protect, particularly the Vaishnavas there, but everyone that's there in the seat of conflict, because we know our philosophy teaches us everyone, whether they know it or not, we all have a relationship with Krishna. So everyone there is suffering. The atheists are also devotees, even if they don't know that. They're also our fellow parts and parcels of Krishna. So let's chant together 3 times. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Thank you. So, actually there's a connection between the special military operation or the war, depending which media we listen to, what's going on there, and the advent of Lord Chaitanya. There's actually maybe not a direct connection, but in one sense, at least an indirect connection. I think a direct connection.
Lord Chaitanya is in charge of this whole thing.
Yeah, Lord Chaitanya is the whole thing. So Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says in the 7th chapter, verse 28, O sign of Bharata, O conquer the foe, all living entities are born into delusion. All living entities are born into delusion. That's everybody in this world. Bewildered by the dualities arisen from, anybody remember? What are the 2 dualities? Desire and hate. Desire and hate. Everyone is bewildered by desire and hate. So each of us, too, we're pushed, and we feel this. If we're a little self-reflective, which we should be as yoga practitioners and as Vaishnavas, as devotees, as people seeking some spiritual knowledge, we should be self-reflective. We see ourselves, we're also pushed by desires, and we're pushed by sometimes feelings of hate. One of the benefits of living with devotees, I'm regularly reminded, devotees don't hate things. Sometimes I'll say, oh, I hate this, whatever. I hate zucchini sabdi when it's overcooked. How's that? For me, that's, no, devotees don't hate anything. It's prasad, you should love it. Okay, that's right, devotees don't hate it. But we're all pushed by these things, because of our bodily identification, because of our minds, the way we're trained. We may feel I like this type of music, and sometimes we say I hate this type of music. Right? Some people will say, I have some neighbors where we live. When it snows, this one neighbor, he comes out in his shorts and his t-shirt, and he's having a great time. And I'm there with my winter coat, my sweater, my turtleneck, my scarf, my hat, and I'm trying to get the car as quick as I can. And I always say to him, are you liking the weather? He goes, oh, this is great weather. This is great weather. So he desires the cold. For me, it's like a little moderate. It's much better. And why is that? Because it's based, we have different bodies. We have different bodies. When I was a child, I went to a summer camp, and they had one year they had a pet pig. A big summer camp. And one of the fun things the kids got to do was at the end of each meal, they scrape all the scraps off the plates, making like this nice soup, put in a big bucket. And all that, because you're kids, you all think, ew. I think adults would feel the same way. They look, ew. But they would take it out to that pig. Oh my gosh, was he happy.
Oh my goodness.
He was delighted. He was like jumping up and down, waiting for that, what we all found pretty detestable, right? But for him, it's very attractive. So sometimes we think, you know, I'm sophisticated, I'm attracted to these things, and other people, they like lesser things. Or, you know, with different cultures that we may appreciate or not appreciate so much. But Krishna's explaining that this is actually part of our material conditioning. That we're feeling, oh, I like this, I don't like that. It's not that I like ice cream, which I happen to, and I don't like zucchini sabji. My body, my sense is that my soul is currently body, that's why we're deluded. And that the whole society, sometimes it sounds harsh, but you listen to Prabhupada's lectures, he will talk about the whole society is living in ignorance. You know, you think like, gosh, that's a pretty tough thing to say. You know, everybody's living in ignorance. There's so much progress, right? Medical progress and political, well, maybe not political progress. I live in D.C., so maybe no political process. But, you know, economic development, so many things. But ultimately, Lord Chaitanya is represented as teach. It's really a manifestation of ignorance because it's based on this desire and hate, how to satisfy these temporary desires. So, what's this got to do with Lord Chaitanya? What's this got to do with the Ukrainian situation? Well, because I'm pushed by my desires and my hate, it can magnify very easily, as we see in the world today. Because what I desire, if you desire the same thing, you become my competitor. Isn't it? And if my family desires the same thing your family desires, you can become my competitor. And if my tribe, or my religious group, or my ethnic group, or my national group desires the same thing you do, it can heat up quickly as we see happening. And even more so when there's a scarcity. When there's a scarcity, then the competition and the desire for, we need the gasoline, we need the oil. You're competitors to us with the oil. We need it, and that leads to all kinds of confrontations, and it can lead to war. So this gives rise to what the Charyas and the Shastras describe as the age of quarrel. Isn't it? You can see it quarrels. My sense is, especially in the last couple of years since COVID, I don't know the exact cause, but people seem so stressed out and things became so impersonal, practically you didn't see a lot of people except on a two-dimensional screen, right? So when you get back on the highway and things, you know, people driving like that's just a video game. They can go in and out, and if you crash, no problem. You just start the next game, see how many points you can get. Instead of thinking, hey, there's people in those cars, and there's people in their lives. So I remember when the pandemic first came, people were discussing, well, this caused us all to slow down and start thinking about things more deeply. And I think maybe some people, yes, a lot of people the other way. It's like they can't wait to get back out and just be as even more intense as before. So, so much conflict in the world based on this perception of desire and hate. So what does Krishna say? What's the solution to that? He explains this in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the last verse. He says, when people understand that actually there's a supreme or divine consciousness, a personality, who's actually the controller of everything, the proprietor of everything, and actually the enjoyer of everything, then people can become peaceful. Because without that, Prabhupada gives a great example. He says, just like if you have a pond of water, everything's nice and still. If you throw a rock in, we've all seen the waves go out, right, in circles. If I throw a rock in one place and you throw a rock in another place and she throws a rock, they compete, they fight, right? They hit against each other. But if we all take as many rocks as we have, big, small, this, that, put them in the same center point, then the concentric circles coming out all are in harmony. It's a very simple example to help us understand what Vaishnavism presents as a vision of life and a vision of reality. That when God or Krishna or the divinity is in the center for all of us, then there's no conflict. If I'm desiring in connection with Krishna's desire, God's desire, you're desiring in harmony with that, you're desiring in harmony, then we can live peacefully. But if I'm thinking my tribe, my nation, my country needs to get these rare earthly treasures, and your competition, then conflict comes. And can get worse and worse and worse, and we find ourselves in a situation now, people are asking, what's going on? Why are all these people dying? Why are so many people dying? And you can say, okay, there's different political theories. The people in Russia will say, well, that was originally part of us and this and that. And I have a Russian friend who told me the other day, it's not actually, this particular war is not between Ukraine and Russia, it's between America and Russia. And in the West, we have the perception, hey, wait a minute, these are democratic, loving people, they just want to express their... All of that may be true or false to a certain degree, but underneath it all boils down to, as Christians explaining here, desire and hate. Because I'm allowing my identity to be based on this body, and I look at certain people and I say, oh, you're with me. I remember years ago, Purnima was distributing books in Denver. We lived in Denver years ago. And she met a man who somehow she kind of guessed his identity. And she said, oh, you're Russian. This is 30 years ago. This is before the current situation. His response is, no, I'm Ukrainian. I curse you to be Russian. She was like, whoa, I didn't know. I didn't know. It's like I lived in Colorado, and the things that folks at college in Oklahoma say about the people in college in Texas. They don't have nice things to say about each other. And there, of course, it's all in a sense of goodwill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it builds. Every once in a while we hear stories of, soccer teams and they have a competition and one group beats up the other group, some of the people get killed. So then it becomes tribal, then it becomes nationwide, and it just grows and grows and grows. So Christian is explaining that actually all this fighting over the earth is coming out of our ignorance. It's coming out of, as Gandhi said, there's actually enough for everyone's need, right? But there's not enough for everyone's greed. So spiritual practice is all about bringing down the greed, bringing down the temperature. Bringing down the temperature in the room. I have a friend, Brahma Tirtha, who does a lot of conflict resolution, and he always uses this little mantra. He says that peace building begins with you got to bring the temperature down. Everybody's all hot and feisty and only can hear their opinion. You got to bring the temperature down in the room. So spiritualized meant to bring the temperature down by having us to have a little moment to think, wait a minute, I feel angry about something, I feel sometimes hatred about something, I feel some possessiveness. Whoa, where's that coming from? Is that a good desire or a bad desire? And to be able to kind of understand those and isolate those and act appropriately. And we're living in a world where when the pace goes faster and faster and faster, people don't stop and think about that. They don't think about the long-term effects of what they're doing. So, Krishna, as he says in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he comes again and again and again in different avatars, different incarnations. Prabhupada says in the purport that sometimes he sends his son, sometimes he comes himself as a disguised form, which is how Lord Chaitanya is described. Sometimes he sends his servant, and different personalities representing him, or sometimes he himself comes. But Prabhupada explains the purpose is always the same, to try to give people some spiritual consciousness according to their abilities to understand. So, I was thinking it's just like, how many of you work in hospital environments? Just a few. Boy, Washington, D.C., a lot of hands will go up. Okay.
I do wood carving. I get cut.
Wood carving. So you get cut to go to the hospital. Okay, so you'll know. Okay.
So
So I want to ask y'all to raise your hand and say who's watched a television show about a hospital emergency ward or
oh
something like
my
that.
goodness.
I want to embarrass everybody. But I know from when I was a young person, all these scenes are something. Or even if you're there and you go to the hospital and you get checked out, every once in a while, is it a code blue or code red, or maybe it varies from different hospitals? Code blue. Code blue, like you're sitting there talking to a nurse or the doctor, and it's like code blue goes off. Everybody drops you and runs down the hall to help because there's a life and death emergency, isn't it? Right? You've experienced that or seen it on television. That's kind of what happens, isn't it? That means whoa, all hands on deck. All hands on deck. This needs special emergency response, okay? That is the mood of Lord Chaitanya. That is the mood of the Hare Krishna movement. That is the mood of the Hare Krishna mantra, which is, as is described, there's different ages, and in each age, it's explained our lives get shorter and our good qualities decrease. And something I find particularly a little unsettling, again, I mentioned I live in Washington, D.C. What's the 4th quality that goes down? Remember?
Truthfulness?
The last one to stand is truthfulness.
Yeah, gambling.
What is everybody talking about in the world right now? Is it?
Yeah.
What's the new mantra about what information we're hearing? I don't remember ever hearing the term fake news until about 10 years ago. I remember there were people that taught media literacy, to young people in schools. How do you understand, when an advertisement is telling you, like I remember when I was a kid, there was one kind of soap, and it was Dial soap. They had an ad, and somebody took their glasses off and stuck it in the soapy water, and it all just ran off. It was like, you got to go buy this because there's no film. I remember, I don't know if I bought it or somehow came across some Dial soap one time. I thought, this is the filmiest soap I've ever experienced in my life. But the advertisement was very conditioned. Oh no, it's okay. So media literacy, how do we understand how to filter things through? But now it's so hard, isn't it? You hear something, you have to ask, well, where did you hear that? What's the source of that? What's the benefit? So people are losing even the quality of speaking the truth. And it's happening very quickly. What to speak of? Austerity, which means putting one's own self aside for the benefit of others. Cleanliness, it's going on pretty fast. Mercifulness, it's holding out, but it's a struggle. There's a lot of people who have lost the quality of mercy. Drive down the highway, right? You see how much mercy is there. So in this age, all of these difficulties are coming up as time goes by. Age of quarrel, so much sectarianism, tribalism, nationalism, negative ways, etc. So code blue, Lord Chaitanya comes. It's like, okay, this requires extra special help. We understand in previous ages people would meditate. According to our Vedic scriptures, people's lives could be up to 100,000 years, which seems like unbelievable, but it's interesting. If you look at the biblical histories, they talk about, I think Moses lived to be 600 or something like that. They don't talk about 900, okay? So according to our cosmology, okay, that was in a different age. So 100,000 years, people could meditate for a long time. 10,000 years, they did different kinds of sacrifices and temple worship and things like that. So as time goes by, lives get shorter, qualities decrease, the problems increase, and Kali Yuga or cold blue comes up. And that's why it's explained in this age, Lord Chaitanya, who we're worshiping his advent today, he comes. There's many, many references in the scripture how Lord Chaitanya is Krishna come again. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. That could be a whole talk discussing that. But for example, it mentions in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that people who are sufficiently intelligent, in other words, who have a little seed of a spiritual perspective on things, they actually worship the divine, they worship the Lord in this age by chanting his names, as explained in the Bhagavatam. And when Lord Chaitanya came, he taught this process of chanting. So I want to reflect for a couple minutes, and then we're going to have some dramas coming up, about the meaning of Lord Chaitanya. What's the mission that he brought? It's described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and elsewhere that the Lord had two kind of themes to his advent. One is described as the more confidential purpose behind his coming. And I'll just mention this briefly. It's explained this is more actually that Krishna himself comes in the mood of Radharani. Therefore, it's described Lord Chaitanya is like Krishna and Radharani combined. And when we read about Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, especially with his most intimate followers in the later years of his Leela, he very much, and you can read histories of other, it's not just our books, you can read histories of India that talk about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and how he was a great saint and teacher, in his youth a great scholar as well, and how he manifested this ecstasy of love of God, how he taught chanting, and how he manifested this ecstatic experience of the love of God and taught his followers the same thing, to the point people would even describe it as madness. And we read in Chaitanya, trying to read in other places, Lord Chaitanya falling into the ocean in forgetfulness of himself and in ecstasy, thinking about Krishna. So all of that is there. Many, many esoteric writings about that. I want to focus a little more about what's described as the external purpose, if you will. I think it's more relevant to the world, and I think for most of it, it's at least, if not more relevant, in terms of our current understanding of Lord Chaitanya. which is, it's also a lot easier to understand, which is Lord Chaitanya came in this very difficult age to give a very simple process. It's described that Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is so kind that as people get less qualified, he gives something simpler. Kind of like if you had a teacher who was really kind to you, and they said, okay, there's 100, you have to take 100 answer a question. And I can't do that. Okay, well, do this 30 questions. Answer. Like that. So I'm thinking of an example of that with Srila Prabhupada. In the early years, and of course later on things had to get a little more systematic, and it doesn't put this together as a policy. But there were at least a few occasions where Prabhupada was offered initiations, accepting formal disciples. And they brought people to him and they said, this is so-and-so. But he's new, we're not really sure if he or she should get initiated. And Prabhupada would ask, so who's Krishna? I remember one instance at least, and he said, well, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada said, okay, you can get initiated.
Krishna.
So merciful, so kind. Because generally, even now, at minimum of 6 months, following regular principles, chanting 16 rounds, a japa every day, etc. So Prabhupada manifests this as well, about the need of being very, very, very merciful. So Lord Chaitanya, he came to teach bhakti, to teach devotion. And he did that, as Prabhupada describes. Krishna came and said, okay, surrender to me. But not everybody could do that. So Lord Chaitanya came and said, okay, I'm going to show you how to do it. I myself am going to practice this practice of bhakti, of chanting Krishna's name, of association with devotees, of visiting temples, of eating sanctified foods. In this way I'll teach you myself. And then he specifically spread the Sankirtan movement of this glorification of Krishna's name, understanding that it's the easiest and most practical method for this age. And therefore we try to make it very, very simple. And although Lord Chaitanya was a great scholar, and many of his followers, Rupa Goswami, especially Jiva Goswami, great, great scholars, many, many books, many, many writings, great philosophical treatises. Lord Chaitanya is only credited with writing 8 stanzas to Shastastika. So in that he says, all glory, if we look at his mood a little bit, and the meaning behind what he was teaching and what this means to us, he says, all glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years together, and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for all humanity. Prime benediction for all humanity. What comes next? You all know this.
I forgot.
So I've been fasting all day too, so somebody help me. Prime benediction, because it cleanses the heart of all desires.
The life of transcendental knowledge.
It's the life of all transcendental knowledge. Increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. So he's glorifying this process of chanting God's names by explaining, first of all, it's there for everybody. It's the prime benediction for all of humanity. And that's something I want to speak about a little bit, really put a priority on. It's there for all of humanity, and then it cleanses our hearts. So just like Krishna says in the Gita, we're affected by desire, we're affected by hate, and if we're a little self-reflective, sometimes it's pretty easy to hate the things about yourself that cause you to hate, and to hate the desires that we have, and to feel that, how am I ever going to actually awaken pure love of God when I have, so many difficulties? Maybe somebody can help her with one of those. She's got 2 little ones. That's a tough challenge. When you're 2 years old, you definitely don't want to sit in a hot temple and listen to somebody talking for 35 minutes. So, yeah.
Dangerous too.
I can relate to that desire. So Lord Chaitanya, he came with this particular mission and taught this, that this is the prime benediction. Anyone can take up the chanting of God's names. And it describes later that you have hundreds of millions of names. We have to be a little careful as a community. Sometimes we may think, well, I like chanting this name. Somebody else chants another name of God in another language, another tradition. That's not effective. That's not what Lord Chaitanya said. He said Krishna is so kind, he has hundreds of millions of names that everyone can approach him in that way. So, going back to this verse that we read today, Lord Chaitanya is described, he came and he broke open, read this again, in distributing love of Godhead, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates did not consider who was fit and who was not, nor where such distribution should or should not take place. They made no conditions. Wherever they got the opportunity, the members of the Panchatattva distributed love of Godhead. So this is, I want to end with these thoughts, emphasizing this. We are Gaudiya Vaishnavas. We are following the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We are Prabhupada Nugas. We're following in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada. This is an essential core principle of who we are that can never be undermined, never lost, or we lose our connection with Lord Chaitanya. He particularly came to give the opportunity for everyone to chant Krishna's names. We know historically, if you look at Vedic culture and other cultures too, only certain people can chant the mantras. Very, 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 very closed. And only certain people could read the books. That's still there in some traditions. And only certain people can enter the temples. And only certain people could do certain types of different services and things like that. Lord Chaitanya put that all aside. Because he went out into the streets of Navadvip and encouraged everyone to chant Krishna's name. And then he sent his disciples. He toured all over India, taught the same principle. And then he sent disciples to different parts of India, particularly to teach the same principle, and also to write books that we passed down throughout time. And if we look historically, the nature, I think it's this desire and hate and this sectarianism that comes in. The history of religious traditions, at least in modern times, is very much bhakti movements being crushed by sectarianism, or at least attempted to be crushed. If you look at the example, looking outside our tradition briefly, if you look at the history of Lord Jesus Christ, he was teaching the goal is love of God. But the religious people in power at that time, they saw that as a threat. He went into the Jewish temples at that time, and there were people outside just changing money so you could go in and you could pay for some type of religious service. And he was so mad at that, if you read it, he overthrew the tables. And then the Pharisees, the people in power at the time, this man's a threat. If he keeps spreading what he's teaching, we'll have no status in society. He's saying that everyone can awaken love of God. He's saying that you don't need to come to the temple and pay the priest to do blah, 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 blah. He's a threat. And we know he was crucified. And we go directly to Lord Chaitanya's time. Lord Chaitanya said everyone can chant Hare Krishna, everyone can join in the sankirtan. Okay? The powers that be, there was the leaders at that time, that happened to be Muslim government, they weren't upset. They didn't care so much. The Hindus, Smarta Brahmanas, whoever they were at the time, let's say that the people in power, I don't know if they were Smartas or Shaktas, whatever they were, the people in power at that time felt threatened. Because he's telling the common people, you can just take up to chanting of God's name and you can awaken love of God. You don't have to go through all of the different ritualistic processes. So the people that did all those ritualistic processes, they were very threatened. And they went to the government. They said, you need to shut him down. He's a threat. So that's when Chandkazi sent his guards. They broke the Mridanga drum, those of you who know the story. And then Lord Chaitanya was not very happy with that. So what did he do? He organized possibly the first mass, non-violent civil protest in history. If you read the history, some of his people got a little carried away. They broke a few trees or things like that. It was basically non-violent protest. And then the Chandkazi met with him, discussed him, and said, okay, I have no more barriers. There may be so many complaints from these religious folks. What you've got is sincere, it's legitimate, it's authentic. We're not going to stop you in the future. Now, fast forward. Skip a few generations, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he, in a similar way, he established his Gaudiya Math mission. He's Prabhupada's spiritual master, so kind of the grandfather of spiritual master. He also met resistance. He was in India that time. He didn't go outside of India personally, sent people later. He was initiating people from lower castes, and he was saying, you can chant Hare Krishna, you can become a Brahmin, you can worship the Lord. That upset a lot of people, to the point when he went to Vrindavan, one of our the most, or definitely one of the most holy places, they shut the doors of the temple, and people actually stoned those people on pilgrimage. Those are people like us, because frankly, some of you may think you were born in a Brahmin family or whatever you high caste. You crossed the ocean, folks. You want to go technically, those part of the scripture, you cross the ocean, you're as contaminated as the rest of us. We are all, in this age, it's described, Kaloa Sutra Sambhava. Everyone in this age is a Sudra, really. Now, we may have high education, we want to diminish whatever qualifications you all may have. That's wonderful. But from a spiritual perspective, we're all disqualified in terms of the kind of ritualistic practices that were popular in the past. But that's where Lord Chaitanya comes. Code blue, Kali Yuga. They're all Sudras. They all cross the ocean. They're all forgotten. They're all lost. They're all materialistic. They're all bewildered by. You meet a lot of people out there in the world, start talking about spirituality. They'll say, well, this one disagrees with that. Whatever, the Christians don't agree with the Vaishnavas don't agree with the Jews don't agree with the Muslims. It's all nonsense, right? You hear people jump to those conclusions. Lord Chaitanya, let's make it real simple, There's so many things in common, maybe different practices, but the essence of it is how to help people develop love of God. So that's what he taught. And Srila Prabhupada also, there's many purports in the Chaitanya Charitamrita about Lord Chaitanya, how Prabhupada himself faced so much resistance. People said you can't go across the world and engage people in chanting Krishna's names. It doesn't work. You can't initiate women. Just to hear, it was very nice to see if you noticed. This is a very significant thing. We may think, it's just a Philadelphia doing puja. There were women up here doing puja. You can't do that in some systems. You go back far enough, you can't do that in Vaishnava systems. There's some Vaishnava systems today, you can't do that. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism, women can do that. In Gaudiya Vaishnavism, in Prabhupada's movement, women sit here and give class. There's no, why? Because Lord Chaitanya broke open the storehouse of love of God. Okay? He broke open this, and they did not discriminate who's fit and who's not fit. Now, that doesn't mean once we start practicing, there aren't things we're supposed to do. It doesn't mean anything goes for everybody. But the door's open for everyone to take up the process. And chant, anybody can chant. You can be the most sinful person in the world, and there's a lot of sin going on out there. Those people can chant Hare Krishna and gradually get purified and gradually realize that these other things aren't so good for us. Wonderful example, I think I gave it last time I was here, Shandasundar Prabhu. One of Prabhupada's first disciples, and he was smoking. Prabhupada found him smoking under interesting circumstances. He was carving the Jagannath deities at the same time. And Prabhupada discovered he had a pack of cigarettes sitting there. And Prabhupada told him, don't let this little thing come between you and Krishna. It's such a little thing. He didn't say, you've been hearing from me for months and you're still smoking, you're finished. He didn't say that. I heard a very interesting story, I hadn't heard it before just yesterday, of some devotees, when deities were being installed someplace in the world, don't give them the details. They didn't understand, and they actually carved the marble of the deities after they'd already been worshipped. Some were being reinstalled in another place. And devotees, when Prabhupada was very upset, that's like major. In his Vajrayana, he was like, your heart skips a beat. Major offense. Prabhupada was initially very upset. But later he wrote a letter to those disciples and was just full of compassion because he knew it's Kali Yuga. People have fallen. People don't know. They don't know what to do. So just chant and gradually make some progress. So that's our mission. And again, we explain to people, okay, you chant after a while, hey, can you sometimes we find ourselves saying to people, wow, that's really good. You quit eating red meat 1 day a week. Bravo. Right? That means they're eating red meat 6 days a week. Or you quit eating red meat. Bravo. That means they're still eating fish and whatever else. Right? But Prabhupada gave us an example. Lord Chaitanya gave us an example to help people make progress. Wherever they are, make the next step. So this is the mood of Chaitanya's movement, and we should protect it. We should manifest it in our own hearts. When somebody comes to the temple, we should think, I want to worship Lord Chaitanya. So as I probably described, if you're Pujari and you're doing arti, we know how ISKCON standards and deity work is very hard, very high, very high. You have to do things at certain times, in certain ways, in certain numbers, in certain materials. But probably explain, if a person comes to the temple when you're doing arti and there's nobody else there, you stop the arti. You stop worshiping God, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's supposed to be worshipped at this exact time, at this exact way. You stop that to make sure that person feels welcome to the temple. Right? And even we understand the deities, this Krishna himself is manifested here in Jagannath and Purnima and Radhashara Bihar. And those of us that have ever done any deity worship, they stand there and practically every day they get poked by a pin or two. Right? They don't need what we offer. Well, why are they here? They're not here because they need our flowers, our $5 or $500 in the box. That's not why they're here. They're here to help us make spiritual advancement. So that's Lord Chaitanya's movement. That's the mission of Lord Chaitanya. And this is a day of celebration for us. Because we realize Krishna is so kind. Lord Chaitanya is so kind that they come to make this process so simple and so joyful for us. So just a quick summary. Everybody in this world is bewildered by desire and hate, including us. We're victims of it. It covers our intelligence. And the material energy can't satisfy us. Even though we think the desires I have will satisfy, it just can't because we're spiritual beings. Second point, Krishna comes. God comes, the divinity comes into this world again and again and again to give us methods of realizing who we are and awakening our relationship with Him. And in this age, third point, most important point, the Lord Chaitanya has come, who's the most merciful, the most kind, the most accessible. Even when we chant, those of us that chant on beads, before we chant our whole round of japa of the Hare Krishna mantra, what do you chant first? What are we supposed to chant first? Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda. That's not part of the ritual. That's because we're asking Lord Chaitanya to help us chant. Because as explained, Lord Chaitanya doesn't accept any offenses. Even our chanting isn't very good. By chanting the Panchatattva mantra, it makes the power by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra that much more purified. So this third point, Lord Chaitanya comes, He's the most merciful. He's given the easiest process. We should take advantage of it. I don't know about all of you, but I can say there's some days I wake up and I wonder, I don't know if I can really go on in my spiritual life. There's a lot of obstacles, mental obstacles, physical obstacles, economic obstacles, depression about the world situation, whatever it is. But I know I can chant one more mantra. I know I can take a little bit more prashadam. I know I can read one more verse. And I know that Lord Chaitanya is going to accept that. And He's going to help me. Because He's the most merciful manifestation of Krishna. So keeping that in mind, let's rejoice this day of Gaur Purnima. How He's so kind, He accepts us. No one is barred. No one is barred. And I would request everyone in your own heart to take a vow today. Not a vow, you gotta be careful in adding vows. Maybe a little promise to your own self. As a member of this community, that you will help manifest that mood of Lord Chaitanya. No discrimination. Old, young, black, white, brown, atheist, theist, this, that, highly educated, not educated, rich, poor, doesn't matter. When they come here, they have a home. When they come here, there's an opportunity. When they come here, there's a chance to chant with us and to awaken their own love of Krishna. This is the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. So thank you very much for sitting. I know the reason you all did because a lot of you have been fasting all day. So you're not really very strong anyway right now. So it's easy to stay on the floor for a longer time. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for celebrating Lord Chaitanya. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Anitama Prabhu. A wonderful talk on Lord Chaitanya's mercy. We have before we go to the drama, we have a quick promotion. We all like a good promotion, a good opportunity to present that. And then it's our Prabhu.
So I will be very quick. I don't want to be the bad person before the drama. So the many books that Srila Prabhupada translated, so one of his principal book is Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. I don't know how many of us have this Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this is the principal work on the teachings and teachings about the life of Lord Chaitanya. So this is in 9 volumes, broken up into 3 sections: Antya Leela, which is the beginning; Madhya Leela, which is the middle, and the Madhya Leela, which is the middle, and the Antya Leela, which is the end. Lord Chaitanya distributed the holy name freely. So we cannot distribute this freely, but this is for $100. This is available in many languages, including English, Hindi, Telugu, as well as Tamil. We have this set outside. If someone is interested, they can please stop by and they can get this set for yourself.
Total of 9 books, I think. It's 9 books, I think, total.
So there are 9 books and $100. And another book that we have that we also want to highlight is the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya, when he descended on earth, he had these 8 verses, which is Shastakam. So all of these are very nicely written in this book, and it also talks about Bhakti Yoga, which is what Lord Chaitanya taught to all of us. So if anyone interested, again, we will be outside if you are interested in taking the CC set or the teachings of Lord Chaitanya.
Thank you, Dan. It's our principal book. Okay, so I want to announce the drama. We have Darshan Krishna. I want to invite him up. He's our director for tonight. I saw him peek in. So it's coming. Let's get a couple of Gaurangas in. Gauranga! Gauranga!